What's going on, everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Marble Snap video. So today we return for another Infinite Decks of the Week, taking a look at a bunch of cool decks that people in the community used for their climb to Infinite. We are on week 3 of the Guardians of the Galaxy season, and have some really sweet decks here to check out. Especially first one we're going to be looking at, which is a Guardians deck itself. So really cool to see. Before we dive into it though, I do want to mention the companion article, which you can find link in the description from Den if you want a little bit more information about some of these decks, as well as links to the various Twitter posts from the users who hit Infinite and being able to import the code nice and easily. So check that out, link in the description, and if you enjoy the content, remember to like, subscribe, all that good stuff here at Marble Snaps though. Starting it off here, we have a deck from Rodri / Mr. Fixit, and he is rocking the Guardians. So this is super sweet to see. Guardians, people have wanted to use them for a while, probably since the game came out, but it always felt a little bit underwhelming. But now, when we're combining Nebula along with certain lane lock effects, Guardians actually get much more consistent than they used to be, and can kind of compete against the meta we have. I know I've been really enjoying these style of Guardian control decks. Magneto is a neat inclusion here because one of the more powerful decks, the Darkhawk stuff, gets kind of surprise wrecked by Magneto because you can just kind of pull their stuff out of the lane, especially if it's a lane you've already shut off with something like Storm or Spider-Man. And being able to close down lanes makes it easier for us to accurately guess where the Guardians need to go in order to actually get a decent hit here. We have Enchantress as a bit of tech too. We're not really hurt by that very much. Luckily, armor probably for a bit of protection, both for our 1-drops as well as our bigger things like Gamora and Magneto. And then the lane lock trio of Storm, Spider-Man, Professor X, and Jeff. Jeff is really good in these lane lock style decks because it gives us another way of getting back into these lanes if things don't go exactly how we're planning when we're trying to close it down. Guardian's definitely really good with Storm because the opponent usually tries to put up a fight for that. Also makes our Nebula better. Just really solid deck overall, and if you've been waiting to play the Guardians of the Galaxy, it might finally be the time to do that and actually have some success. So love to see it. Congrats on hitting Infinite with the Guardians. Then next up, we have a Destroy deck. So Death Wave kind of caught in the crossfire of the wave change, but Death cheaper now, so we're seeing the Destroy decks pivot. And this is a pretty neat list that Blue Vitter took to Infinite, making use of that newly buffed Venom, which is nice to see. Null finally finding a bit of a home here outside of a Galactus shell, which is really cool. I think there's a lot of unexplored territory here because Destroy decks were always kind of the death wave. So now we're kind of seeing how people adapt now that that's not really a strategy you can make work in the same way as before. We're seeing some cards that previously didn't see much play, like Sabretooth, getting tried again because of the Venom buff, most likely. And also just gives you more Destroy fodder, so hopefully you get that death nice and cheap, or just blow up more stuff for your Null. I really like this. Zola's neat because it can definitely catch people off guard, especially if you have one big thing and your opponent's trying to Shang-Chi it. You can just Zola it, get in 2 other lanes, the Shang misses. It's pretty nice. I really do like this deck quite a bit, and I'm excited to see where the Destroy archetype goes from here, because it definitely feels more about all the Destroy elements, whereas previously, yeah, there was a lot of Destroy stuff going on, but we were really doing it so we could get that really cheap death while locking the opponent out with wave. So nice to see that this deck is still fairly viable, even though some changes had to be made. Another deck we have here from Bird Snap is a lane control deck with Orka. So Orka making it in 2 weeks in a row. Really love to see this kind of thing where these cards that were previously unplayable now are having quite a bit more success after the kind of buffs they got in the recent OTA changes. So idea with this one, it really does feel a lot like the old school ongoing Destroyer in a way. A little bit less heavy on the ongoing, which is probably not necessarily a bad thing given all the Enchantress around, but we do have things like Cosmo, not only to protect our big Destroyer, but also make it not go off if we don't want it to, if we don't have our armor set up to protect our other lane. Attuma Professor X is a neat little combo where you can play Attuma in an empty lane, and then you can follow up with Professor X, and locking down the lane prevents Attuma from blowing up. Also have armor for him as well, 410, pretty decent. We have a lot of ways of getting into lanes that might otherwise be locked down, so this should play pretty well against lockdown decks as well. with Mr. Fantastic, Nightcrawler, Jeff, and Vision all giving us ways to spread our power around the board where the opponent might not be able to really reasonably predict where we're going to go to finish out the game. And obviously Orka is just a really big body, and a lot of people don't see it coming, especially if you have kind of just not done very much stuff in a lane. Most of the time people are assuming if you're going to play anything there, it's going to be 9, 10, maybe 12 power. And Orka's 16 power. That's a lot of power. That's pre-nerf Destroyer. And it's not that hard of a condition to satisfy as long as you're mindful about it. So I dig this. I think Orka has a lot of potential, and it's really nice to see that people are having success with this card after the changes were made to him a few weeks ago. Next up, we have a deck here from Lego PC, who made the climb with a newer version of Shuri. A little bit of a hybrid here, where we're seeing the Black Bolt Stature package make its way in, so as Polaris. So we're kind of combining the Stature Good Stuff deck with the old Shuri deck with things like She-Hulk, Taskmaster, even Captain Marvel and Vision. And I kind of like what's going on here. We have armor for a bit of protection, and I played a bit of Shuri recently, a little bit different list, but kind of similar. And Shuri really is far from dead. I think people moved away from the card far too quickly. Especially right now where a lot of decks are having to make a choice between Shang-Chi and Enchantress, because not as many are finding space for both of them outside of maybe some dedicated Zabu shells. But a lot of people seem to be picking Enchantress over Shang-Chi recently because of the abundance of cards that get under Shang, like Stature and Black Bolt, etc. So you can kind of take advantage of that, the fact that it feels like there's a bit less Shang-Chi around, and when there's not much Shang-Chi around, Shuri still puts out a lot of power. She is still a very powerful card, even though she is a little bit more streamlined, easy to protect for the opponent. If they don't have their answer, it can be pretty hard to outpower the Shuri deck. I do like the inclusion of the Black Bolt Stature stuff, because not only is it solid if we do get our Shuri, but it's also fine if we don't. Just playing the Black Bolt on 5 into Stature Captain Marvel, Stature Vision, Stature Taskmaster if need be. Just seems good. And we can do the Shuri into 5-drop into copy with Taskmaster. If it's Black Bolt, we can weave in the Stature as well. Just seems really solid. A lot of good lines here, and I think people definitely did move away from Shuri a bit too quickly in terms of her potential. So nice to see that even though this card was changed, it still finds a solid amount of success. Next up, we have a Kitty Pryde deck. So this is pretty cool to see. Kind of a hybrid version of Sera Control meets the Bounce Shell. This one's coming from The Name Is Joke, and they used it to finish their climb just after the patch hit. I really like what's going on here. We have some nice synergy to bounce stuff with obviously the Kitty Pryde and Angela. Very, very powerful combo. Goose is a really interesting inclusion because now it's a bit trickier to sneak under the Goose outside of maybe Zabu stuff, because you can't easily just do the wave cost reduce stuff on the final turn to get under it. Hitmonkey Mysterio stuff has been really good in Sera for a while now, really good in the bounce deck for a while, so no surprise they're coming together here. Star-Lord's a kind of interesting inclusion. I wonder if they're doing that for the quest, but he's really not that bad in Sera, especially when you're able to predict where your opponents are going to go more easily if you're playing him later on in the game. In worst case, if you miss, you could always just bounce him with Beast. Definitely like the inclusion here. Obviously, you gotta be a little careful about your Killmonger, but very easy to kind of play around that most of the time. Just play the Kitty afterwards. Kitty's been really neat in these Sera shells, because a lot of times the Sera decks do have a spare mana here and there, so being able to just juice up your Kitty seems really nice, and we can juice up the Angela on top of that. Also good with the Bishop, just very good synergy with cards we are already very happy to run in Sera. Interesting inclusion of the Juggernaut here. I think they're leaning on him as like one of the tech choices to help close out the game instead of something like Enchantress. Juggernaut just is able to say, hey, on the final turn, if there's space on the board elsewhere, your cards are not landing here. And that seems good for a style of deck like this, because we can amp up the power a ton in one lane with our Angela and our Kitty, and then kind of force the opponent into that lane and guarantee another lane for ourselves at the end of the game. So I like this list a lot. It's cool to see Kitty Pryde having so much success, and we're actually getting to see so many different things tried out with her because it's been given to everyone for free. So really nice to see. Like the idea behind this deck, and I definitely expect to see a lot more Kitty Pryde on the ladder the rest of this season. Due to the rise in kitty pride's prevalence, Sandman has also been making a return. This is also relevant because even though Wave got changed where kind of nerfed her in terms of the She-Hulk death stuff, it made her a lot better at helping close down the game on turn 5, so she kind of acts as a pseudo Sandman now on turn 5, which is really nice, while also allowing us to ramp out earlier if we so choose. Wave can be pretty deadly with Odin too, especially against these bounce decks. Black Widow might seem a little strange here, but I've seen this play pattern before and it's really neat. Basically, you curve out where you go Black Widow into Wave in the same lane, and you can Odin the Wave lane, so not only are you putting them under the Wave effect again where they can only play 1 card, but you're giving them another Widow's Bite, which will also cost 4, so they're actually not going to be able to draw a card that turn. So you actually deny them 2 draws with the Widow, and if you're proccing it again, it's actually the 3rd draw that gets denied, so pretty neat. I think it's definitely really frustrating when you run into it. I think Banks is the one that kind of coined that strategy, and I think it's pretty powerful. Other than that, we just have good stuff to ramp into here. Dino, because they're not playing a whole lot of cards. Sandman, obviously acting as our way to deal with things that try and play a lot of cards, like all the kitty decks going around. The Black Panther Zola combo, which is something that feels like it's been kind of forgotten about, but still puts out quite a lot of power. Leader is really good with the Wave as long as you're ahead going into the end of the game. And then Doom, obviously very good with Odin and Chavez, so we can hopefully get our cards a bit more consistently, especially our ramp pieces, because we definitely lean on them pretty heavily. But really dig this deck, and I think as long as Kitty is popular, Sandman is going to have a very relevant place in the meta. So shout out to Kyle the Cat for making it to Infinite with this version. And to close it out, we're going to be taking a look at a Thanos deck. So Thanos still actually kind of relevant, even though he is not as popular as he once was. This one comes from OWU3X, and they took this one to Infinite earlier this week. But very interesting version of the build. They have a little bit of lane control in Spider-Man, but they're not overly leaning into the theme, which I think is also a fine way to go about playing this deck. Obviously, we have a pretty high curve here because of Lockjaw. We want to cheat out a bunch of big things with our Lockjaw. Even though he was changed a little while back, Lockjaw is still very powerful. We have Tech here, Shang-Chi. That's probably for most of the Darkhawks going around. That's the one thing that I think has scared Thanos a bit out of the pre-Infinite meta, has been the fact that there's a lot of Darkhawk around, and it can be kind of a downside when your deck is already starting out bigger. But sometimes when you get quite a lot of your stones, you can draw through your deck pretty quickly. Lockjaw helps with that a ton. We have Jeff, which is nice against other lane lock strategies. So that's always convenient. Arrow gives us a little bit of game against all the Galactus going around. Blue Marvel and Devil Dino, some premier 5-drops that can be very powerful to ramp into with the Ramp Stone on turn 3. Play a 5-drop on 4, 5-drop on 5, really good. Or just cheat them out of the Lockjaw. Doom lets us go wide a bit. Shield can be pretty nice, not only as just a big thing to pop out of the jaw, but sometimes we aren't using all our mana in the early turns, so she can be reduced. Then obviously Thanos for the stones, so we have stuff to drop into the Lockjaw, and he acts as another big thing that we can pull out of it. Nebula has seemed to be pretty good in these style of decks, because if you get her on 1, she's a pretty versatile threat that kind of messes with where the opponent wants to play their cards. And if we get her late, you can just always throw her away into the Lockjaw. Wasp is good for that reason too, and allows us to use our Lockjaw the turn we play it on if we get it on curve, so that's nice. And then Jeff's just Jeff, really good, very solid card, and you don't mind if he pops out of Lockjaw because you can just move him on out of there. So nice to see that Thanos, even though it's not quite as popular as it used to be, can still be used to get the climb done. And there we have it. That is going to do it for this week's Infinite Decks of the Week from the community. Again, if you want to check out these decks, link in the description below to the article. You can find out some more information about them. And if you get to Infinite with the deck and you want to share it, make sure to tag the Marvel Snap Zone Twitter for a chance for your deck to be featured on the show in the coming weeks. That's going to wrap it up for this video, though. If you enjoyed it, remember to like and subscribe, and stay tuned here at Marvel Snap Zone for all your future Marvel Snap content needs. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.